and welcome to the Book of Leaves podcast. My name is Cara Carney and I am your host. Back to Book of Leaves, the Irish podcast where I interview people in Ireland that are doing something good for the planet, and the whole idea is I and you, the listeners, can take a leaf out of their book or several leaves to add to our own way of eco-friendly living. And I am delighted to finally have someone on to talk to us about Doughnut Economics. I work in the arts industry. My brain goes like moo. I just don't understand economics. It's not something I'm used to at all, and I recently met Róisín at an event in Cloughjordan Eco Village, and I was like, she's the woman for the podcast. So cannot wait for you guys to listen to this. Oh look, it's 2222 angel numbers, guys. Manifest the future we all want. So the podcast is coming out to you literally late today on the 25th of September, the Monday that it was supposed to come out, because I've just been chasing my tail recently. Usually I have a batch recorded, but I had some tech issues with the last episode, and I've just been delaying fixing them. So I am delighted to have some interviews, really exciting interviews now planned for the next 2 weeks, so that I don't run into this issue and you'll have your podcasts early on the Monday morning. So the next one will be out in 2 weeks' time. I've been chasing my tail because I was busy doing the play that I was talking to you about last week, which is going to be ongoing. So I'm probably just going to mention that very quickly every episode. It's called The Curious Case of Albert Cashier, coming to a theatre near you. It's an amazing true life story about a transgender Irish soldier who emigrated Ireland after the famine. And there was a big court case in the US and everything about him. It's the best piece of work I have ever had the opportunity to be involved with. So if you can get to it, please do. I'll leave a link in the show notes, and everything else that Róisín mentions, books or businesses, groups. She has such a wealth of knowledge of like community organizations, and it's all linked in the show notes. If whatever podcast platform you're listening on doesn't have that ability, some places that you listen to your podcast on doesn't allow hyperlinks, but if you go onto bookofleavespodcast.com, you will find them there. And yeah, I think that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this chat. Please support the podcast on Patreon if you can, patreon.com/bookofleaves, or on Buy Me a Coffee if you can't. That's no problem at all. Please give a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you're listening there, and if you're on Spotify, if you could take 4 seconds to just scroll down and tap 5 stars, that would be amazing. And 4 seconds, you probably have a few seconds left over. It's really, really quick, and it all helps in getting the podcast shared to more people, and of course recommend it to a friend. So this is a long enough episode as it is. I will let Róisín introduce herself, and if you've any questions, feel free to reach out to them, and I'll catch you after for some quick show notes. Enjoy.
So I'm a designer, a strategic designer. I work in the technology sector, but I'm described as an artist, cultural thinker, and I own the title of climate activist. I think that's really important that we own that. So my background is in technology, both at a global and local scale. And I have a background in social research, community development, and education as well. So that's kind of my worky work. I live in rural North Wexford in a place called Cahor near Ballygarrett in County Wexford, and I am the steward of 12 oaks.
Where are these oak trees that you were stewards of, and what does that mean?
So we have planted 9 oaks. One of our neighbours planted 1, and 2 have appeared in the garden as seedlings. We have just under an acre, and it's in a weird triangle shape, but I did plant a lot of trees after we were within the first year or 2 of being here. So they're now 16-year-old trees. They're mature. It's like a pocket forest in one side. We've really learned things from stewarding trees and having trees in our garden, and how they grow and how certain trees have to be established before they come in. So that's been a real learning practice and really interesting. And it's an alternative way I find of introducing myself in different spaces to say that I'm a steward of 12 oaks.
That's really, and I think it's a really nice use of language to say, to link in with the fact that we're stewards of the earth. We don't own anything. Where everything is kind of not rented, for want of a better word, from future generations, borrowed. And you said something else really interesting there, owning the term climate activist. What do you mean by that?
So I think that there's a lot of people trying to work on climate, in around it, beside it, advocating for it. I meet a lot of women in particular, maybe that's just because they open up to me more, I don't know, who are, I would describe them as climate activists, but they don't own that term themselves.
Hmm.
I think that we should be, if we're shown up, we should say we're shown up. And like literally, I feel that we should be owning it, because if I say out loud, I'm a climate activist, somebody looks at me as like a 50-year-old woman who's like, geez, she thinks she's a climate activist. And I'm like, yeah, I am a climate activist. And I think that empowers other people to also own things that they're doing in community spaces or
Hmm.
their places of work, or whenever they're having those conversations.
There could be listeners of this podcast, or there's definitely people listening who will know others that are like, oh no, I wouldn't call myself a climate activist because they don't see themselves as being active enough. I probably only landed on that term after going to protests, but really I kind of, without knowing it, was a climate activist for a very long time, with my connection with animals and nature and being a vegetarian since I was a child and stuff like that. So that's a really, I love that.
Yeah, I think we have to own it, and I think
Yeah.
me owning it encourages other people, whoever you are, if you're
Yeah.
listening to this podcast.
Big time. And so tell me, was there like a catalyst or a moment that inspired you to kind of reconnect with nature? If you're planting trees that many years ago, obviously you weren't of the many people that were inspired by the Greta Thunberg movement. You've
Yeah,
been kind of clued in for a longer time. So what happened, or was it your upbringing? Who inspired you?
I would partly say it was my upbringing, but so my dad grew vegetables, and my mom was really into plants, and she knew the Latin names of things. She was a flower arranger, and they both did a lot of community work. But my dad grew vegetables, so like I have a really early memory of being given a small space in the garden to plant vegetables. And the first thing I grew, I remember like the first thing I grew and I ate, and it was beetroot. And I wasn't overly impressed, I have to say, but I loved it. But then there was a couple of key things. So as a teenager, I was really concerned about acid rain, ocean acidification. And so that was like in the early 80s, I'd say. The other, like one of the big things, and I remember distinctly like asking my dad one day when he was driving the car, I was really concerned about things like, should good agricultural land be lost to urbanization? So I remember asking my dad that one day in the car, and he nearly crashed the car because I was a really quiet teenager, and he was like, what? And at the time, he was actually he was a statistician in CIE, and at the time,
What's that? Sorry.
a statistician. So he was involved in strategic planning in
Okay.
transport. And he was working with the EU on those kind of subjects around transportation and mobility
Wow.
towns and cities and connecting those spaces. Anyway, that's kind of a little bit of the background. I really connect with the
Mm.
sea, but also like a kind of a macro and a micro level. So like the landscape and really small details of like, when you look at leaves or you look at a tree, the extendedness of how it's connected and how it is just, and how nature adapts. I find that fascinating. And then during COVID, the early days of COVID, I remember sitting in the garden and there being no airplanes in the sky, and all my plans for studying abroad and work had evaporated. And I sat and I read the SDG goals. So they're the UN sustainability goals. And I read them and delved into them more. And then I looked at how they were going to be managed, like the key performance indicators, and how we were going to know if they were successful or not. And I read through some of that and I went, how is my local, like in the village that I live in, there's like a population of 500 people and there's like a small shop. I was
Mm.
like, how is our local shopkeeper going to understand these goals and be able to implement them?
Mm.
I started thinking about that, and I started looking at how they were relevant to normal people who run small businesses. At the time, Doughnut Economics Action Lab was just about getting up and running. I joined. I got really curious about what they're doing. I had read Kate Raworth's book, Doughnut Economics: How to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, probably like 2 years before COVID had hit. It had been around, and I was aware of it. But when I saw the Action Lab getting set up, I became a member, and I started noticing other Irish people had joined. And I suggested to another person that we meet for a virtual cuppa, like a
Yeah.
coffee virtually. We were in COVID, we were in lockdown. And then I was like, should we open this up? And so for just over a year, I ran a weekly conversation about Doughnut Economics in Ireland. And it just happened. I didn't do it intentionally, but this network of people formed. And now I am the network steward and founder of the Irish Doughnut Economics Network, which is a voluntary group that comes together to support people locally and nationally. And when I say people, I talk about places where people work, live, play, and learn. So it should cover all bets, right?
Yeah.
If there's any places outside that, let me know.
Yeah. I know of Kate's book, and it's been on my to read list for a long time, just out of curiosity. And I love when chatting to other people, they're like, yeah, well, how are we going to build a future with no capitalism, Cara? I'm like, Doughnut Economics. And they're like, what's that? And I'm like, well, it looks like a donut, and like it's good for the planet, but because I haven't read the book yet, I just I know I just can't explain it. I'm not very good at explaining. So imagine like if the listeners haven't heard, and also I am not an I can't even say the word, you hear me, economist. Like when I start thinking about like systems, like I work in theater, it's just a completely different world, and my brain just goes fuzzy. I'm just real curious about this. So yeah, if you could help me and listeners know like what it is, and yeah,
Yeah.
that would be great.
So let's get one thing out of the way straight off. I'm not an economist either. And sometimes I catch myself describing Doughnut Economics or being asked these questions. I'm like, how did this happen? I've just become one of these people who stands up and explains it in Irish context and is incorrigible. So for anybody who doesn't know what it is, so if you Google Doughnut Economics, you typically come up with this graphic that's a circle. And there's two rings. There's the ecological ceiling, and then there's the social foundation. And the space between those things, I'll talk about those things more in a minute, but the space between those things is the safe and just space for humanity to thrive in. And that space looks like a donut. And that's why it's called Doughnut Economics. So on the outer circle, the ecological foundation, Earth scientists have agreed that there are nine things in the planetary boundaries in that ecological foundation. And they are climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, biodiversity loss, air pollution, and ozone layer depletion. Now, when I started talking about Doughnut Economics, we had overshot 4 of those planetary boundaries. We've now overshot this summer 6 of those planetary boundaries. And recently I heard somebody refer to them. If we think of those 9 planetary boundaries as significant organs in our bodies, 6 out of 9 have failed. We've overshot them. And so in the graphic of Doughnut Economics, the overshoot is shown in red. So let's talk about the inner circle, the social foundation. So these are very much aligned to the SDGs, the United Nations Sustainability Goals. So in the inner circle, we have water, food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, networks, and energy. Now, that's what's described in Doughnut Economics as the social foundation. And one of the important things is that we need a strong social foundation for us to thrive and to have a good life. And we don't want anybody falling through the hole of the donut in the middle in the social foundation shortfall.
So we don't want anyone missing, like being unhoused. We don't want anyone with no access to education. Like everyone ideally should be living within the donut with all the access to things that we need to live a
good
life. Yeah.
Yeah. And we need to be careful that the conditioning that we're currently in of what a good life is needs a radical reimagination. And that's one of the things. So in Doughnut Economics, that's the donut, let's say. But there's a second part to Doughnut Economics that I don't think gets talked about enough. So it's important to cover them too.
Mm.
And that's the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. So this, one of the things that Kate wants to do is she wants to reclaim what economics is. So economics is set up on principles from the last century. And she's like, we need new principles for this century for, you know, how we get to the future. In my own creative practice, I work with questions. And one of the questions I've been trying to solve is like, how do we create a future worth living into? And to me, that's why I've become this advocate for Doughnut Economics, because it's a system framework that lets us understand more. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. So the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist are: 1, change the goal. So moving from GDP, which is all about consistent growth, we cannot have continual growth. We need to move from that expectation that we can have continual growth. Nothing grows continuously. Nature will not grow continuously. It'll peak and then it'll die off and it'll compost and the cycle will rebuild. Even invasive plant species, they have a die off. They have a point that they hit where they can't go any further. So we need to move from the goal in our current societies of GDP to the donut. So embrace the 21st century goal. That's the first
And
one.
GDP is a very dated thing as well. I was reading Rutger Bregman's Utopia for Realists recently, and he talks about like the universal basic income and looks at the GDP, and countries with the highest GDP could also have the highest homelessness. It does not reflect a good life. Yeah.
You'll see, and that's really important. So the good life, there was a piece of research done in 2018 by Leeds University, and it looked all across the globe at what countries were in the donut, and no country is in the donut currently, right? So what we see is that countries with high GDP, which might have a strong social foundation, are overshooting the planetary boundaries. So countries like, you know, that we look to, like Finland and Sweden and Norway, all have huge planetary overshoots, but might have a strong social foundation. Countries that have that are within the planetary boundaries have maybe extreme poverty issues and social shortfall within the center of the donut. But it is, the actual piece of research was called The Good Life, and it's by Leeds University in association with Kate Rayworth and her team as well. So I think it's really interesting to look at it, but we need to move to 21st century economics, basically. And right now, I'm sharing Doughnut Economics as a possible solution and inviting. The thing about Doughnut Economics is it's invitational and it's accessible. So the second piece there is see the big picture. So not the self-contained market, but moving to an embedded economy. The embedded economy looks at what we have in terms of our household, the market, the economy, society, and within the earth, but it's contained. It has a container, and it might be things like moving from solar energy, translating that into energy through the market into products and out into heat on the other side, and what that means for our communities and how we live well, but contained within the earth's boundaries. And then the third one is nurture human nature. So last century's economics are based on rational economic man who is by himself, who is me, not we, who has no family, no community, and is just completely cut off. And humans are social and adaptable creatures, and we need other people. So that piece of nurture human nature is really important as a principle. Then the fourth one is get savvy with systems. So one of the things that I see, you know, you mentioned that when you start thinking about systems, your brain gets fuzzy. We aren't taught well about systems. So in the theatre space, you might think of it not just as your practice, but as the whole theatre space you're in. So everything from the lighting, the energy, the ticket sales, the marketing, that's theatre, and a performance has a system around it and behind it. The stage where the wood came from, the seats the audience sits in, how that happens, how people come together to create that theatre, how that gets delivered in space in a performance. That's a whole system. So it isn't the performance, it isn't the practice, it isn't the writing of the words.
One can't exist without the other.
Yeah, and if you think about them as all being connected, like you don't all just arrive and have a successful performance. So if you think in terms of systems, if from the theatre side of things, if you think of it like that, that might be useful. But systems are dynamic and complex. And it's known that once you start observing a system, it changes. So like our systems are things like, you go online and you order a piece of clothing and it gets packaged, it gets shipped through the post to somewhere, it gets put in a container in a ship from China or on an airplane or from wherever you're buying your clothes, right? Talking vast generalizations. And then that gets sent through to the Irish postal system. It goes through their sorting, goes through our postal system and gets delivered to the places where we have put our address on that. And that's a whole system. And we need to think about like, where did that fabric come from? Who worked on it? Have they had a fair, just price for their garment? Has the cloth been ethically created? Have we paid a just and fair price for that so that we can wear it? And when we're finished wearing it, can we recycle the cloth? Can the cloth go back to nature? Or has it got microfibers in it that actually create waste and pollution and it can't be sent back? So these are all kind of things in terms of thinking in systems, that as one example. Then the next one is design to distribute. The belief was that growth would even out again, but it doesn't even out. And what we need to move to is distributive by design. So if we can think of that as networks, so making sure that when we're designing, we're consciously building distributive practices within our design.
As in, like, there's not one dragon sitting at the top of the company kind of hoarding all the profits, that things kind of get shared between workers and go back into the community, or whichever way.
Maybe from stakeholders to co-op owned. Like the idea that our food we could grow in our communities and it would be free is kind of radical revolutionary, but that is actually what food used to be. Yeah, distributed by design and really using our networks and our connections to create distributive. So at scale, that looks really different to how we run businesses and our economies now. So the sixth one is create to regenerate. So one of the things that I've started speaking about recently is instead of us thinking about rubbish and waste, we should change that on our bins to materials. So that when we think about throwing something out, we think about what is the next life for this particular object that we're putting in our bins. So it's that idea that when we're finished wearing something, whether we just don't like it anymore, or whether, we've changed shape and we don't want to wear it, whatever it is, or whether it's got a hole in it, that we repair it, we gift it, we donate it to a charity shop, but that we don't throw it out. We don't throw it away. We look at what this product can have, what's its next life. So moving from that linear process to very much a regenerative process, and buying things with that in mind is really important as well.
Yeah,
and then the last one is be agnostic about growth. We are currently addicted to growth. All of the stories we hear about growth, all of what we consider is all about growth. What is that success thing? You hear the Irish government supports startups if they're going for growth. If people aren't growing for growth, they're not so interested in giving them support.
It's not viable, yeah.
So right now we need to be growth agnostic. That's a really challenging conversation to have in businesses as well. So think in systems, see the big picture, be distributive, nurture human nature, be regenerative, aim to thrive rather than grow, and be strategic in practice. So Kate Raworth has this brilliant thing that she talks about, which is go where the energy is. I remember asking her a question on a call, a webinar with the Deal community. And I was like, how do we get county councils to work with us? And she was like, don't even try. Work with the people who are ready to do the work. So I think it's really important to find who else is in action and partner with them and go work with them, and always ask whose voice is being left out and make space for different people to join those conversations. not being the leader, but that distributive thing is bring other people with you. Don't be the movement, share the movement. And I think as practicing principles, they're really important for how we get to where we need to go.
Talking about Dumb Money, the film that I went to see in cinema yesterday, they were looking at the broken stock exchange system on Wall Street and actual it's like the way that we all strive to be Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, we will never be them. Like,
not everybody thinks strives in that way.
100%. But I think so many people are like, they think that they are closer to being a millionaire than they're closer to being homeless, but that's not the case. Like,
I think the challenge is that if our society puts men like that on pinnacles, billionaires on pinnacles, and if we look at the integrity of how they run their businesses, if we look at the mental health of some of those people, if we look at how they practice, how they treat their employees, we have some serious questions if that's what we're allowed to as
yeah.
and that is definitely not how we get, in my opinion, not how we get to the future. And I know people will object to me saying that, but for me, there's real challenges with a society that values. Now, you've got to remember that we're looking at it from a very Western white privilege point of view, okay? I want to name that and acknowledge that. But even as a technologist who's worked in the sector for 30 years, I think this is the challenge if you put like a human at the center of the focus of the world, you create like a burning earth. That's what we have. So one of the things, just to bring the conversation back to economics, is one of the things about Doughnut Economics is that it really talks about the deep design of where we're at in the world and where we're at in the human context world. Now, again, one of my challenges is I want nature and I want other beings besides humans in that circle. So for me, I sometimes refer to, that safe, just space for humanity and other beings. That's what I see. I think the challenge is that if we put our humans at the center of everything, we need to decentralize ourselves. And I always imagine it as slightly off to the left and out of the central focus. We need to know that we're part of the system. We're not at the top of the system. And if we remain at the top of the system and place ourselves there, we are not going to get to do what we need to do to pull back inside of the planetary boundaries and have a good, thriving life. Because social justice is critical to the delivery of climate justice.
Exactly. And can I ask you, how does Doughnut, because obviously I know of a circular economy, because right now we have something that's created, we use it, and as you were saying earlier, it kind of goes in the bin. We don't treat it as material. And a circular economy looks to kind of keep things going for as long as possible with secondhand fashion and repairing and reusing and that. And circular in my brain got confused with Doughnut Economics. So like those are two separate things, but I guess circular economy feeds into Doughnut Economics.
I would have it as a subset within Doughnut Economics. One of the ways we deliver Doughnut Economics, because the circular economy is about keeping things, that materiality of things, keeping it in cycle longer. So, for example, circular economy, I'm going to talk about carrots, right? So we buy a carrot that's been grown well, that hasn't damaged the land and hasn't damaged other beings that in the space that it's grown. And the grower of that has pulled the carrot and is available to you to buy. Now, growing food is really hard. Can we be really clear?
I tried to grow carrots. They came out 2 inches long and like half a centimetre wide.
Yeah,
so thank you, food growers.
The idea that you can go into Lidl and Aldi and buy a bag of carrots for under €1, that is not what it costs to grow carrots, right? So the challenge is to have food created, right? Then you take that carrot home. It's got a little bit of muck on it. It's got carrot tops on it, and it's got the roots on it, right? You wash it. You take the carrot tops off and you peel the carrots, right? You have your carrot that you might want to eat raw or you might want to cook with or whatever. But then you have the peels and then you have the carrot tops, and you can actually eat the carrot tops. They've been made into pestos or other things. If you scrub your carrots and peel them, then you can make, I've seen people make carrot peel dukkha.
Partake. Yeah.
Yeah, you can add the peels, you can dry them, you can put them into soups, you can roast them and have them as crisps. Or what would have been done in the house that I was raised in is that you would have taken the carrot tops and the carrot peels and they would have been put in the compost heap. I mean, the idea that I live in a village of maybe, let's say like 300 families. Some people might get their food delivered, right? So maybe we're down to 200 families that have 200 separate cars that go separately to Gorey, the nearest biggest town with like a supermarket, and that we all buy our food separately and take it home and cook it and eat it and have waste and whatever else. If you were designing a food system, you wouldn't start there. So anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, not at all. No, it's all linked in. Absolutely. So was there something else that you wanted to add on there about the donut that you were talking about?
The deep design shapes what organizations can be and do in the world. So the purpose, the networks, the governance, the ownership, and the finance are really important. So how do we look at the current businesses we have and in terms of our current economy, and how do we support them to redesign their businesses and their products to be in the donut, to be in that system space where we're not overshooting the planetary boundaries and we're respecting the social foundation and no one is falling through the hole in the middle of the donut.
And have you got any answers to that question?
Well, I'm working on that. That's what my activism is, right? So the piece for me is, so currently IDEN, the Irish Doughnut Economics Network, IDEN. So I'm having conversations with businesses, with county councils, with communities. Last week we ran a Dublin 7 Doughnut Day, which had 40 plus people from the local area and national organisations like Focus Ireland. Really interesting mixture of people in the room. We offered a workshop in the morning called Step Into the Doughnut, which is a really fantastic, active, engaged practice that is a soft introduction to Doughnut Economics. It's 45 minutes to an hour long. I'd encourage anybody listening to this podcast to go to the Doughnut Economics Action Lab website or Google Step Into the Doughnut and you'll find the instructions. You can deliver that workshop anywhere you choose. All the instructions are there. It's all created in the Creative Commons. If you want some support to deliver that, you can reach out to the Irish Doughnut Economics Network. That workshop takes Doughnut Economics from being a brain thing into being a heart thing. It's amazing. It's really about moving through those ideas and really bringing it as an invitational practice. People walked around and talked about, what they were relating to, what was coming up for them. And then we asked the community what else they would add. So things that tend to be missing, although networks is included, it doesn't quite cover community. So often community is one thing that's added to the social foundation. Care work was another thing that was added, which was really interesting to see. Spiritual and divine was added, which is also really interesting to see from an Irish context or from any belief system or non-belief system. So one of the things that you do is that you share the knowledge with the community, you offer it as engaging space, and then you create a structure around that. And then these little groups form to talk about how you bring those ideas from post-it notes into first step actions. What might those 20, 30 Dublin 7 Doughnut stories be? What might they be? And that's the approach that we took. There are 6 projects coming out of that Doughnut Economics Dublin 7 Day, which is fantastic. Let's be really clear, right? So I think one of the things we need to do is we need to talk about how we get our own agency to do things, right?
Yeah.
So I've been running this national conversation about Doughnut Economics. I've ended talking to politicians. I've ended talking to councils, as I've said. I had the pleasure of co-keynoting with Kate Rayworth at Environ 2021, where I got to share that keynote on Ireland Thrive in the Doughnut. And she spoke about Doughnut Economics, and I spoke about Ireland being in the Doughnut, and that's up and available if people want to look at it. So I've been hosting these national conversations, and that idea of how we bring movement and agency to different places is really important. So I've been involved in lots of this volunteerism, and I've been finding it really hard to bring this conversation to my local village and to our local communities
Right.
through Wexford Environmental Network. So don't get me wrong, it's hard. It
Yeah.
requires you to build your own community around yourself, find people who are interested in the things you're interested in, support them, they support you, practice like radical collaboration, right? That's what we need. I'm hoping to start that conversation in Gorey before the end of the year. I've put some things in place that should be able to support that. But I'm looking for ways of constantly, how do I bring this conversation, not just to the big town near me, but to the little village near me? But I am also looking at how I bring the conversation about climate more succinctly into my employer, for example.
Yeah. So if anyone is interested in like your sparking ideas in their brains, are how can people like get in touch with you or IDEN for like any kind of guidance or tips?
Yeah, I think just we have a website. I'll send it to you for your show notes.
Yeah.
We're still on Twitter X, and there are some reservations about that. So we have a website and a Slack channel, and I'll send you a link if people want to join. The
Perfect.
idea is that we will have we do have an email list, but it's infrequent. There's one due to be sent out, but we took a siesta over like the summer, and we'll be getting back on track with more regular digital meetings. And then there's opportunities to engage in different spaces.
Yeah, people can find them below. And then I guess you already gave us some lovely kind of leaves or suggestions, I guess, when it came to tree stewardship and Doughnut Economics, of course, as well. Have you any other leaves to offer people suggestions? It doesn't have to be related to Doughnut Economics, it could be anything, even though everything is related to Doughnut Economics.
Yeah, in my mind, anyway. So there's a couple of things. I recently I attended a webinar on how to be a climate advocate. It was run by Work on Climate, which is this huge organization that's set up by ex-Googlers. They have an amazing Slack
Oh,
channel.
wow.
Really interesting work. Again, I'll share that with you. But they ran a webinar, how to be a climate advocate without changing your job. And it was so interesting. This idea that you don't have to work on climate, you can
Yeah.
do your job and advocate for climate within a business that you're already in, I think is really interesting. And like because of the fact that I've been running the Irish Doughnut Economics Network, I know that there are conversations going on in tech companies in Dublin, where Dublin is their global head office for global tech companies, and they're talking about Doughnut Economics inside in their business. I know of utility companies in Ireland that employ over 8,000 people in Ireland that are starting to use talk about Doughnut Economics and trying to see how they can work with it within their organisations. So Dublin City Council have a councillor who's really active in bringing Doughnut Economics into Dublin City Council, which is amazing. And she's working directly with the Doughnut Economics Action Lab that Kate Rayworth is the co-founder of.
So you don't need to be working in the environmental sector to make this happen. Like where you are, where you're working,
Yeah. So
yeah.
Very practically, I came across an app recently, and I think its potential to be brilliant. It's called Hurd, HURD. And what it does is it asks you a set of questions. So it'll say to you how much time do you have, and you can say 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and it'll go through a set of questions, and it rates your employer, not you, your employer. So it's the potential to be like the glass door for sustainable brands and not greenwashed. And it rates them for head, heart, and action. It's really interesting. Really recommend. I'm not connected to it. I've just seen it, and I've basically answered a load of questions. I think I spent 45 minutes answering questions. But I think it has the potential to be a game changer, because if we as employees, if we as people who buy things, people who work, people who are attending university or schools or whatever it is, we need to demand more. And so that's one of the things that I also talk about is use your public voice, use agency, join Fridays for the Future protests. The other thing I heard recently on a podcast was join a group. That's really important. And if there isn't a group locally where you are, start one. I'd really encourage people to do that. Like, I really believe there's space for everyone, and we need everybody to show up and start now if you
Yeah.
aren't involved. And I think it's also really beholden on anybody like running a group or meetings is to make space for new people, especially people who show up and they aren't quite sure what to do. I was listening to one of your podcasts. It was after the Mary Robinson conference. Interviewed one of the climate activists, and she was like, yeah, I showed up and I just got in and started doing stuff. And I think that it's really important that we invite people in and we make them welcome, and
Yeah, no, you're so right, because I would have been of the similar kind of personality as Jessica. Like, I would have been able to, I showed up to Extinction Rebellion by myself and was like, how can I help, and got involved. But that is not the majority. Even if it was that minority, we would still, if there's shy people who come, or they some people need to be kind of approached in a friendly way and be like, hey, like, welcome to every new person that comes to your group. Because I've seen this in kind of other kind of environmental things, and I'll kind of step in and then be the induction person or whatever, because you're so right, it's so important. Because if people don't feel welcome or included, or some people can just feel a little lost or overwhelmed, and it'll put them off coming back. It is so important to be mindful that not everybody has got the personality type, or whatever you want to call it, to just inject themselves in. They need a kind of, like, perhaps like a helping hand, for want of a better term, to bring them in and kind of show them what needs to be done, or encourage them.
Yeah, and on that, it's really important. So I practice like a trauma-informed approach to the design work that I do. So I think it's really important when people show up in climate spaces, they can be in deep grief, right? And it can be for some people, it's their last resort because they don't know what else to do. But if we're mindful of that no matter how somebody shows up in that space, welcoming them into that space is really important. Everybody has a space, but again, we need to find our spaces. At the beginning of this year, I organised a couple of craftivist meetups for people across Ireland interested in using craft as activism. And the slogan that we kind of met under was "Even quiet work roars."
Even quiet work roars. That's lovely.
Yeah. So not all activism is shouty. Like, look at submissions, argue about things that you want in, write to your TDs.
Yeah.
Again, I think like we're coming into general election, making sure that people are like this is detailed, but signed up to vote is going to be really important. Hostings are going to be really important. I think anybody knocking at your door, have your full list of what you want to discuss. I think that's going to be incredible. And so when I say use your public voice is one of those things within the social foundation. And I think in Ireland, we need to be better at using our public voice. It's like that thing of calling out racism. It's like that thing of showing up in spaces as allies, not just, agency for ourselves, but for agency for like the river that doesn't have a voice, or the mountain, or somebody who's excluded from those conversations.
Yeah, because we have an awful habit of Irish people worrying about what the neighbours will think, so we just stick with the status quo. But deep in our hearts, we're rebels, and we're poets and artists, and we're also really influential. Our tiny island has millions of people across the world that identify with us in some way, shape, or form. So there's so much potential there. Absolutely.
The other thing is, I just want to say, is food waste is our biggest greenhouse gas issue in the EU.
Wow, yeah.
We've got to tackle. It's really unsexy to talk about, but we've got to tackle it. So, learning how to cook, learning how to make food, how to shop for food, how to shop within a budget. These are things that some of us know, but there are those of us that don't know that. I think also if you live by yourself, being part of a friends group or a community group where you shop together and cook for each other, so that you're looking at cooking at scale and economies of, like, then you're also tackling things like loneliness, or I'm not going to cook myself something, and like convenience food versus real food. Nutrition, I think they're really important things. So where you cook, how you cook, share your shopping, food and eating together. I think that we need to challenge how we feed ourselves, how we nurture ourselves as well. And with the whole thing of like reducing food waste.
Yeah, no, but it's so because we're very privileged here that we can go to the supermarket and access a whole bag of carrots for less than €1, and then we just kind of don't think about it at all. Like, yeah, the system is very much broken, but there are very creative ways, and I like that you kind of linked in there, like cooking and eating with other people. Like that's just not something that I think people think about when food waste. They think banana bread, but what if you
We
you
love
involve your
bread.
friends, and we all love, yeah, not that this banana bread, not that this banana bread, but no, there's like, yeah, like you were saying, this is a Doughnut Economics, and I guess building the future we want. It's all about like imagination, like how do we get there, and think outside the box, and think outside the very oppressive norms that we've built. And on that note, so I've been taking a leaf out of Rob Hopkins' book, which I love. His book From What Is to What If: The Power of Imagination to Change the World has really impacted me in a lovely positive way, and I would recommend that for people who haven't read it yet. But he has a podcast where he basically, his guests will time travel to the future and talk about the things. So they could be talking about introducing wolves or Doughnut Economics, whatever it is, universal basic income, and what that future looks like, and then how we get there. So in that vein of things, Róisín, we're going to imaginatively transport ourselves into the future. Could be 50, 100, 300 years in the future. But this future, oppression has been eliminated there. Doughnut Economics is a thing. Maybe it's even a better model, but like, we have our social foundations. We're not overshooting our planetary boundaries. You can either paint a picture of this if you like, or you can just tell us some of your favorite things about this future that you're seeing now.
So when I think about what we've achieved to bring every being back into a safe, just space for humanity and nature within the planetary boundaries, I smile. I think of the place that we get to as being, the world is kinder, we're kinder, we've slowed down, we've time for connecting, sharing things we don't all need to own, growing food, tending to our place and each other. We've learned how to have discussions, to disagree and not fall apart. We've learned local decision making and governance. Ownership has changed. We have shaped belonging so everyone is welcome. And well-being is now our measure of how our community thrives, as do I.
Beautiful. I mean, can you say it any better than that? I don't think so. That what a beautiful future to strive towards. Róisín, I can't thank you enough for sharing that with us and for all the work that you're doing. What a beautiful, beautiful imagining of the future. I absolutely love that. And I actually forgot to say at the start as well that I was at Veg Fest over the weekend, so yesterday, a vegan food festival, but it's more than that. It's not just food. It's full of small businesses and talks about the future that we want and how to fix the broken systems that exist all around in our society today. And it's just such a hopeful event. So I had an amazing time there, and I facilitated a talk with NARA, National Animal Rights Association, with VCONS, with Animal Rebellion, and with Jake Conroy, I think his second name, who has the name The Cranky Vegan on his socials. And it was a really amazing, lovely, powerful talk, and enjoyable, even though what we were talking about, climate change and animal activism, is quite stark. But there are ways that we can communicate and enjoy ourselves while doing so. So yes, thank you so much to everyone who showed up at VegFest, and if you found the podcast because of that, welcome. And yeah, I hope you stick around. And it was just a lovely, beautiful example of loads of small businesses that aren't striving on growth, that have that kind of already donut economic model where they care about their employees. It's just a beautiful atmosphere, and there are loads of businesses like that exist in Ireland. Fairly is one. It's a zero waste Irish shop run by James and Owen, and I remember, I don't know if I read an article or if I heard them on another podcast, but growth is not their model. They are happy to reach a certain kind of size as a small enterprise and not, branch out and have like chains everywhere of this zero waste shop. That's just not what they're about. They just want enough to kind of like live by, and I love that, and we need to foster that more. So if you have a small business in your area, whether you're in the middle of Dublin or you're in the middle of the countryside, please do support your small grocers, the farmers markets. They need our support as much as possible. Share and spread the word of mouth of any markets or events that are happening, and let people know. And it's a lovely communal way to kind of hang out as well and just talk about where your food is coming from and everything. Like, Doughnut Economics, I have come to learn, encompasses everything that we're like is part of our life, not just consuming, but that we interact with. It's all interlinked. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this chat. If there's any topics that you'd like me to cover or people you'd like me to interview in future, please do let me know. And yeah, hopefully I'll see some of you at the play that I'm doing at the moment, The Curious Case of Alba Cashier. So yes, thank you for listening, and I will be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode, hopefully earlier in the day than this. So usually I'd say have a good day, but now it's nighttime. But if we're listening in the morning, good morning, and just have a great week. Okay, that's enough for me. Okay, bye.